Hello and welcome. Today I am joined by Angela Jackson. So Angie, thank you very much for joining.
That's an absolute pleasure. Thank you for asking me.
No problem. So no, I'm really looking forward to this. We're not from far away from each other. I know you from your Alderley Edge days. I'm just down the road in Didsbury. So no, I'm really looking forward to finding out a bit more about you and your career and how you got into this area. But if you just start off by telling me where you're from originally.
So I'm a local girl. So I was brought up in Cheadle in Cheshire. I went down to Oswestry to physio school. And then when I first qualified, I had some real serious knee problems, which I'll expand on, but ended up out in Canada for a couple of years and then came straight back, worked at Wythenshawe, and have been pretty much here ever since.
So what made you want to get into physio in the first place then?
Yeah, so I was a aspiring tennis player. Thought I was really good. Worked out after I wasn't, but loved my sport. Played everything going. Came from a very, very sporty household, and I think retrospectively probably got sort of like patellofemoral issues. But a rather over enthusiastic consultant took my medial and one of my lateral menisci out. So I had loads of surgery between the ages of 16 and 18. And whilst I was intending going on to play sport and then going to university to do sports science, I found out that I wasn't going to be able to ever play sport again. And so at 18, I was sort of a bit flummoxed. And the only thing I knew anything about from the previous 2 years was physio. So I sort of stumbled into it really, rather than having a passionate desire to do it all of my childhood. And first year hated it, and then second year I went on to the spinal injury unit, and it was very early on. You've got to remember how old I am, Andy. There were very few Paralympic or disability sports around at the time, and so on this ward were a ton of like young men, motorbike accidents, paras, tetras. And the college were really good with us, and they put us all in wheelchairs and basically said, right, you're going to spend the week learning what it's like to be like these guys now. They wanted to play sport, and I was one of the ones who had been so heavily involved that I got involved in wheelchair basketball. I got involved in javelin and all sorts of things, hydro, and kind of had a real reality check that what had happened to my little knees was like incomparable to what had happened to these guys. And started to wake up to what I might be able to do within the industry and still have my sporting connections, really. So absolutely no regrets. I'd have been a failed tennis player. I definitely wasn't good enough, and loved the last 35 years.
Oh, great. So why do you think that you didn't like the first year of physio?
I don't think I was probably feeling very sorry for myself. I couldn't do any sport. It was a very dry way of teaching at that point. It was all anatomy and physiology. There was nothing really that physical about it. And so I kind of probably just needed to grow up a little bit. I probably needed that reality check. And then I hadn't gone into it thinking that this was my passion, this was my dream. And I think that's what's really interesting is talk to loads of kids now who maybe have that same experience. They have physio and then they realize that's what they want to do. But having had two kids of my own, a lot of them just have no idea what they want to do. And I would say that physiotherapy wasn't my passion, but has become so, and certainly working with young athletes. And I think it's something I've grown to love, as opposed to knew that I wanted to do it from day one.
Yeah, no, that is really interesting. And so when you were going to Oswestry then, so was that like a practical course then? Was that the actual way you learned? That
Yep,
was where you were
3 year physio
taught?
course. Yeah.
Right,
So there were
okay.
no
Is that
universities then, really. They were all based in physio colleges, and that was
yeah.
the only one with places left at the last minute. But actually, it gave me a really good grounding because it was an orthopedic hospital. So for me, there was loads of like rheumatology, as I say, spinal injuries, spinal surgery. It was very heavily orthopedic based, and it was brilliant for me.
Mm, right, okay. Yeah, so it was one of the one of the specialist centres still then.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. That's it. So when you were doing that course then, so you started to enjoy it a little bit more after the first year, like at what point did you start to think about what you wanted to move into?
I think there was a part of it was I was limited. I couldn't fully kneel at that point. I had a lot of pain. The knee was giving way. So I couldn't really do neurology. I didn't feel safe transferring patients. Ward work was going to be tricky. So a little part of it was kind of like, not really, it was almost chosen for me. When I first qualified, I couldn't do basic grade rotations because I couldn't do half the stuff at that point because I was really struggling with mobility. And so an opportunity came up to go out to Canada and work in a kids sports injury clinic. And that's like, I absolutely loved it. So that's what I did. I spent just over 2 years in Toronto, and it was a specialist kids clinic. It was just unbelievable given how many years ago it was that we had access to MRI scanners then. I was working with a kinesiologist, which was very much a sort of like muscles and exercise related. There was a sports podiatrist in the unit. It was just the most amazing grounding. And so when I came back, I knew exactly what I wanted to set up.
Oh, right, that's amazing then. So like, how did that opportunity come up? And also, like, where were you living then? So what was the environment for you moving?
Yeah, so one of my best friends from my childhood in Cheadle-Hulme, in fact, went out there, and I'd been out many times during my teenage years. Their whole family lived out there. So they sort of I'd always said I'd like to do a spell out there, and this there were loads of jobs available then anyway. So I was looking on the Canadian sites and they had a journal and was able to identify this job, applied for it and got it. And then I was able to live with my family friends for the first few months getting set up, and then rented an apartment with a Scottish physio. And we had a blast. It was good.
Sure. What's Toronto like?
Amazing. Yeah, I loved it. Really, like, it's changed a lot since I was there, but it's very, very busy now. But an hour north of Toronto is just like lakes and we did loads of sailing and we did lots of different boating things because the weather's really good in the summer. We were outdoors the whole time, which was very much me. And then I did tons of traveling, went over to Vancouver, Boston, all over, sort of during the holidays and the weekends and stuff. So it was amazing. I had a great time, but it definitely generated in me a kind of a pathway that I knew what I wanted to do. And there was always that angle of why did I get injured? Why, given that loads of my friends were playing that much tennis, what happened to me and why? And the more I kind of got working into the kids clinic in Toronto, the more I began to identify trends and patterns and start to kind of go, well, maybe that was it. But that's what fueled it really. It was sort of part, I wanted to do something where I was going to be physically involved because I needed to replace that like loss of sport that I'd got. But equally, there was always that nagging, why me, not in a selfish way, but trying to work out how to stop another kid getting hurt in the same way.
Yeah. So was it always going to be 2 years there, or was that something that you
No,
decided?
my mum and dad came out and I had a wobble, and kind of thought, right, if I'm going to go back, it's now or never. I was getting really deep roots entrenched, and I kind of missed certain aspects and certainly missed family. So it was definitely, I needed to then move into a different role, probably needed a more senior role. There was nothing really coming up where I was, and I kind of wasn't really ready to do a big change at that point. Because I was still only about 23, 24. So I was still quite young, really, for what I was doing. And at that point, I jumped over the need to do a basic grade rotation in the UK. So when I came back, I could then take a static outpatient job within the NHS, which is what I did.
Okay, whereabouts was that at?
So initially down in Shropshire, where I'd done my training, and then came up to Wythenshawe in Manchester, and got sort of more teaching based. I think I probably, like, it was always that, do I go into teaching or do I go into physiotherapy when I was 18? And so I kind of realized that I definitely wanted to be in a teaching role. And so the job at in Manchester, we set up a whole load of like graduate post-grad training. So there was the head physio from Manchester, there was another physio from Wythenshawe, and we basically were training all the new grads as they came into MSK. We basically did a block with them, and it was the most fantastic thing, all on the NHS, all cross trusts, and it was brilliant. We had a great time, and hopefully they felt really confident that they were coming out of college and then they could really cement their knowledge. But it doesn't exist now in the same way, I don't think.
Yeah, that does sound like really good. Why do you think it doesn't exist now then?
I don't know whether it's because the trusts are perhaps more like standalone, and maybe there's less cross funding or something. It would be quite hard to do it, I think, for the small numbers within one trust. But because we had obviously rotating staff, so every 3 months we could do a block, but it would be across central Manchester, across South Manchester, across Trafford. So we had lots of different physios rotating to us. And then they'd come to us for this block of training whilst they were doing the rotation. So it was really good.
Right.
Probably funding nowadays.
Yeah, no, a lot of things have changed. But like, do you see in terms of like the opportunities within the pediatrics, were you still able to work in that area then?
So I ended up probably like I had that interest. I within Shore we opened a physio department in A&E, which is still running now. So I could naturally see a lot of young athletes as they came into A&E. The soft tissue work would all come our way. So I think I managed to navigate a little bit, but then within probably 2 years of being at Wythenshawe, I set my private practice up in 1992. And so through friends at the local hockey club where my husband played and various contacts, I started seeing more and more kids, started doing talks for kids in clubs and schools. And this sort of private practice then really filled that that passion for looking after young athletes and developing them.
Right. Just to touch on that physio, I went to A&E with a broken toe and it was amazing. They saw me within about 30 minutes at Wythenshawe.
Yeah.
Very impressed. Very impressed. So yeah, well done for setting that up. That was it stood me in good stead. But going on to your practice then, so what was your vision when you were setting up the clinic, and was it in the same spot that it still is there now? So on the edge?
Moved a mile down the road.
Right.
So initially, Kate, who's the physio in A&E at Wythenshawe, and myself were just doing evenings, and then it was your typical sort of pathway, really. I don't think I knew what I wanted to do, get this multidisciplinary clinic together and provide like a pathway. So when we were in Canada, that we were in a big gym. So you had like in this country, we had ACL classes and knee classes and things like that. But for me, it was about trying to produce that from start to finish, getting them so that they were from injury right back to return to sport. And I think that that's what I felt lacked. We do what you can do in a 13-foot square treatment room is very limited in terms of getting people back to running and getting people back to multi-directional sport and all those sorts of things at the high level. And certainly we do that in elite sport, but we're not doing it brilliantly still in kids. And that's where, for me, these kids break down and get recurrent injuries, or they go on to re-injure ACLs and things. So I was kind of really just looking to set something up where I could really get involved with the psychology of being a youth athlete, trying to help them mentally. So we took on initially about 10 sponsored athletes, and we basically worked with them, giving them everything that they might need, from nutritional support through to psych, through to physical stuff. We had classes for them to do S&C. And from that, the clinic grew, because those kids would go back to their clubs and schools and say, you know, this is what I'm doing. And then other parents would say to us, well, I want that. I'll pay for that. I want that for my little kid. And so from there, it just snowballed.
Yeah, that's quite advanced for its time then, in terms of bringing S&C into physiotherapy and the other aspects of things. But what do you mean by sponsored athletes?
So as a clinic, we let them have free physio.
Okay.
We gave everything for free for those 10 athletes. So they were basically able to access our services, whichever that was, be it podiatry, be it the sports massage, the classes. And we basically helped them to, and they had to apply for it. We ran a search for a star campaign with the schools and clubs, and it was really cute. We got we had some amazing talented kids. And we tried to pick the ones with the teachers that we felt would most benefit from our help, be it by their attitude to learning, their teachability. Sometimes we were able to support some extra kids who maybe financially wouldn't be able to afford our services, but not in all instances. So it just gave me an opportunity to kind of really help it was all that I wished I'd had when I was 15 and struggling around that, injured, don't know what to do. Why did I get injured? What can I do to help myself? We basically put that in place for the physio fit athletes.
Great. No, that does sound amazing. So how had you funded this then? Because I mean that's not easy to just sponsor this and running that sort of thing, albeit it led into more business. But setting up for one in Alderley Edge is, I'm assuming, not cheap. And then so how did you come to pick that location, and how easy was it for you to finance it?
So it's funny when we started out in my husband's back bedroom. He had a house in Alderley Edge, and so he'd make them gin and tonics downstairs. They were all mates of ours at this point. Don't worry, it wasn't the kids. And so we'd kind of got to a point where we were seeing, friends of friends, and then it got a bit bigger. And because I had no rent, I was able to save up some money, and then that enabled me to rent a room from another physio in Alderley Edge. And then we kind of outgrew that. And I took premises just off the high street, and we rented a two treatment rooms and a reception. And then a lot of the staff that are with me now were with me then. So some of our staff have been with us over 20 years, which is incredible. So we kind of all just grew together. And when we expanded, and 2 rooms wasn't enough, we then were able to rent the space where we are now. And then an opportunity came up through probably about 5 or 6 years ago to rent the Wilmslow Rugby Club gym, which is run by a company called Fitism. And they invited us in to have a physio room there. And that gave us a full suite of rehab facilities. And prior to that, we were going into schools and having to use school gyms and things. But once we got into Fitism, that last 6 or 7 years has just been amazing, because we've had indoor and outdoor running space. We've got all the fields that we can run, do multi-directional stuff. So it's been really cool.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful. And do you think that it was you having that focus on that youth development side? Do you think that helped you as a business?
Yeah, I was talking to. I've been mentored a lot by Andy Hosgood and Phil Badley with the Elevate program. And I needed that really to keep me sort of understanding where I was going with the business. And I was talking to him about it recently, and we kind of talked about who was our best client, who were we trying to attract. And we actually came to the realization that the youth athlete had a mum and a granny, but equally probably I was the absolute typical person we wanted in our clinic, because I had 2 very sporty kids, and they all had tons of mates, and they were involved in tons of different teams. And then I was also looking after mum and dad as well. So effectively, my own body was falling apart, and I was trying to play golf. My parents needed treatment, my kids needed treatment. So we ended up that whilst the youth sports model was what I personally, as a physiotherapist, was working on, the actual clinic set itself up around what I'd call that. I shouldn't call myself a middle-aged woman, should I? But I think it's fair to say I might be, because we had physios then who specialised. We've got a later life business. So we went out into the domiciliary setting. So we'd got sort of a physio who was a fantastic resource to us, Fiona, who built up the whole of that later life section. And then we just became sort of an umbrella organisation where I set the values and the culture, and then we let people do whatever their passions were. So Clive was wanting to get into cycling and bike fits and all that sort of stuff. We had other physios wanting to get into running. So we sort of kind of just let the team, whoever fitted the bill and had that passion for the quality we wanted to provide, we just let them kind of fly with what they wanted to develop. So we've got this big umbrella organisation of lots of people doing their own specialities.
I love that philosophy. I think it's such a good, powerful way to do it, to get people genuinely pushing. And it comes across, doesn't it, whenever someone's really into it, like you can hear when you're still talking about your experiences as as an adolescent, then yeah, I really love that philosophy.
No, it's been good. I think everybody, you can obviously, most of our physios have stayed with us for 10 years. Some of them then have gone on to set their own clinics up and done really, really well, but we're really proud of that as well. And so I think people have been able to develop their own interests. We've got a vestibular service, and that's moving now into slightly towards concussions. So with some of the stuff has been really good from a marketing point of view, that if I go in and do a talk in a school or a club, then which I've done a huge amount over the years, then mum sits in the audience, dad sits in the audience with the kid, and they're kind of going, oh, I wish I could have a bit of that. I've got a bad this, that, or the other. And then before we know it, we've got the siblings, we've got the aunties, we've got the grannies. And that's very much been our USP, that we'll treat the whole family.
Mm. And then, so at what point did you then go, presuming you went full time with the private clinic, how long was it before you went full time there and focused on that? A year, right? Okay, so it was pretty quick turnaround then.
I think I was very lucky in that my husband had a solid job. And sort of while I was out in Canada and working from his house initially, we were able to build up a little bit of a buffer to help me get set up with all the equipment that we needed and everything else. But it was about a year, I would say. And I started out part-time and then gradually just kind of moved it over. So that's the only thing I was doing.
Right, okay. And then I know you're particularly interested in, well, after tennis, like you do a lot with the golf and cricket. How did those particular interests come about?
When you introduce your children to sport, you need to be seriously careful as to what you introduce them to. So we had two kids, and both were sports mad from day one. So Andrew played cricket from very, very early age, and hockey, and he played both to representative level. So we ran around the side of cricket fields from he was in the Cheshire team from under 10. And on a very wet day in Malvern at a cricket festival, when I had 20 something, or maybe not quite that many, 15 little under 10s, very, very frustrated boys, the coach turned to me and he said, is there anything you can do with them? So I screened them all, and we started looking and saying, well, let's look at the shoulder mobility. They've been all playing cricket for 2 and 3 years. Let's have a look what's happened to their bodies. And it was fascinating because their bowling arm, their throwing arm, the little growth plates had all changed alignment already. And we were seeing massive asymmetries in range in their throwing arm, asymptomatic, but it suddenly whet my appetite that maybe we needed to look at this. And my husband, meanwhile, back at the ranch, is a county cricketer as well. And so I was looking at him going, well, why can't you throw from the boundary? Your shoulder's knackered at that point. So we started to correlate the two and work out when some of these injuries started, or not injuries, but changes in the adolescence started to occur, and the impact that was having on senior cricketers. So when I got back from that particular tour, Cheshire approached me and said, well, we want to do this with our elite players. So I then literally for the last, well, Andrew's 26, so 16, 17 years, I've been working with Cheshire Cricket, and we work with all their elite players. I do all the junior squads at some point in the winter, just taking them through how to do proper warm-ups and how to do little bits of strength and conditioning. And then a huge role is coach education. So that was the cricket. And then both kids played hockey to a high standard. And my husband and I had been involved in setting the ladies section up at Alderley. So we kind of very much got involved with being coaches and taking the youngsters. And that kind of led to a more S&C role within our junior programme. And then the younger one is a windsurfer. So I ended up massively involved with all of that side as well. So she's still a professional windsurfer. So being able to go all over the place with her and just have such fun looking at the different physical things that happen to a windsurfer compared to a hockey player, to a cricketer and stuff. So yeah, it's been fun.
Wow, that's amazing. Professional windsurfer then.
Yep. So lucky things in Italy at the moment. It was Tenerife for the winter.
Awesome. I'll check her stuff out actually then. It always looks amazing, windsurfing. It's like it's quite it's great to watch, isn't it, when you see them doing like the jumps and different things.
Not quite so when you're a mother. So but yeah, at Sarah Jacko is her Instagram feed, and she actually does the social media for the team that she's a rider with. So right. Yeah, she has lots of fun, but mostly it's upside down doing loops and all sorts of funky things that she knows freaks her mother out.
Yeah. Oh no, amazing. No, that's really good. And then, so you mentioned as well that we're working with Andy Hosgood, and I know Andy really well. Brilliant guy. Like, I really always encourage people to speak to him because I think he's just such a good guy in general, and very, very knowledgeable and very methodical. But like, how did you start working with him? Like, where did you come across him, and then how was that experience in general?
Yeah, I heard a webinar that he did probably 3 years ago now. And he just talked so much sense. And at that time, I'd just been approached as to whether I wanted to sell my clinic just before and around COVID kicking in. And I kind of sensed I was sort of for probably the past 2 years, I guess, I'd been very aware that I was wanting to get the business ready to sell, but wasn't ready to sell it at that stage. And I was very, very busy. And I kind of felt like I didn't have enough structure. And the more that you got this bigger team, the more almost I felt I was being a bit isolated. And I didn't really feel like I had that facility really to share ideas with somebody who'd really get it. And I heard Andy speaking. I think it was at something like one of the therapy. It wasn't Therapy Live, I don't think. It was one of the one that's in the Midlands in November. I can't remember its name.
Therapy Expo.
Therapy Expo. And I kind of went, yeah, that makes so much sense. And so I ended up starting to work with both he and Phil, and we met every 2 weeks. And it was brilliant because they really, really sort of microanalyzed the business to start with and looked at where our most profitable things were, and helped me build up that awareness as to who our ideal client was. And so they were brilliant for kind of giving me a structure and helping me to kind of focus on what I really wanted to do. And they were a huge resource in terms of personnel issues. We were able to talk through things that I didn't feel I was managing brilliantly, and they had lots of expertise. They helped me find a health and safety company that we needed. So it was just the most incredible thing. And at that point, it wasn't really about actually it was about preparing the business and being less Angela Jackson and more physio fit. So I needed to get myself out of it a little bit, because to sell it, I think it's fairly well recognized that if you are the massive figurehead and you are the business, you're not got a business to sell. So they were really helpful in showing me how I could bring people through in the business to be more senior and to build a trust in them. So we put lots of things in place, and then I got an offer to sell the business. And whilst it wasn't quite ready, it was just seemed to be the right thing. I'd found COVID quite stressful. We furloughed all the staff, and I was doing Zoom calls because we have an NHS AQP contract. We were able to switch everybody overnight, literally within a week, to Zoom, but I was the only one working. So we kept one person off furlough and the two of us, and then we rotated them every few weeks so that somebody else could go on furlough. But basically, we Zoomed from about 8 a.m. till 8 p.m, just keeping the business afloat. And it was a really scary time. You've gone through 28 odd years of owning this business and believing that that's what you're going to have as your nest egg for retirement, and something you're really proud of. And it's been something that you've put so much energy into. And that first few months when we were closed and all we had was Zoom, and you didn't know whether that was ever going to change, was probably more scary than any part of the business setting up or anything like that. And so when the offer came in to sell, I just kind of go, yeah, I want to just focus on what I want to do now. And so Riz, who's bought it, he's had a clinic in Manchester and now obviously bought the business, kept me on to work with him over that year, still helping him out now. But really now I'm able to focus more back on that education stuff that I did in my early part of my career.
Mm. So no, that sounds great. I'm glad Andy and the team were able to support with that. I think it's great to hear that positive feedback.
I'm still working with them now because I wanted to set up this new education business, and I kind of needed some guidance as to how best to do that and how to market it, because it was very new for me. Like, the business had grown quite organically, whereby mum sent a kid and the kid sent their mate. And here I was now with this new product going, do you want to come along on my courses? And so they've been fantastic. I wouldn't be without them.
Brilliant. So what was the vision for this new venture then?
So when therapists, and I'm very clear now that I don't want to just work with physiotherapists, there's sports rehab, sports therapy, there's the sports science degrees, there's so many routes now to working with young athletes in a really efficient way. And so, but most of them don't cover the kid at undergraduate level. I think the sports rehabbers and sports therapists do a little bit more, but the physiotherapy undergrad doesn't do any MSK youth athlete. So they get probably that block on MSK adults, and they may get a little bit of special needs depending on if they elect for that or if their university has a setup to do some more special needs. But if you go out and you work in a normal NHS clinic, or you go into a private practice somewhere, or you go into a football environment or any of those, almost everywhere you're going to see kids. And they won't know that that Achilles tendinopathy is actually probably severs. They won't know that that adolescent low back pain is probably a stress fracture, not a muscle strain. So I think what I became aware of was that when we were interviewing as a clinic, we'd created all these modules for training our own staff because we knew they needed to know about kids. So I have very much adapted that now and created a course so that when you've got your new graduates or those wanting to go and work in an academy, they want to work in the EIS, they've got a course now that they can literally use as a resource to filling that gap about the pediatric pathologies, the differences in approaches. So it's kind of, I think at the moment, probably one of the only courses that's got both assessment, diagnosis and rehab for the youth athlete.
Amazing then. So is that something that you had looked at? You mentioned like the ideal client that you're targeting. So what sort of organisations are you working, or who are you targeting is probably the wrong word, but who is your ideal customer or client for this?
So that is $1 million question, because we've found that it's really helpful for the NHS physio who's seeing kids either in a more adult setting but getting kids coming in through AQP contracts. We've found that the more less sporty MSK pediatric physios really loving it because it gives them some extra rehabilitation tools, because just because a little kid comes in with Osgood Schlatters to an NHS facility, they're still going to go back and play 4 and 5 and 6 sports a week. And so they've really enjoyed having those extra rehab tools. And then we're getting great feedback, doing some work with some of the football clubs, training their new recruits. Because what tends to happen is, ironically, if you go and work, say, one of the local football clubs and you're a new recruit, the most likely is you'll be put with the youngest team. And the one team that you have absolutely no experience with and absolutely no clinical knowledge of is the youngest kids. So I kind of was very aware that within football, within rugby, cricket, when you're going to work in those settings, you absolutely need to know that kids are not mini adults. And that's what the course is called. So.
Yeah, no, it sounds great. I'll put some information in because I think it does sound really
I'll send you the
interesting.
links through afterwards. So
Yeah.
no, I'm loving it. It's absolutely great. So I've set up now trying to kind of build it as a resource rather than just a commercial entity. So I've joined the APCP, which is the pediatric version of the CSP. So helping out on their committees. We've created a Facebook group called Peds Needs. And that's for all the disciplines to come in and exchange case studies and resources and infographics and things. And then I'm doing like a monthly newsletter. So trying to help people I've got the time on my hands now. So I'm condensing research into blogs or infographics and sharing those on social media. So people who are time poor, which I most definitely was when I was full time, have got that place to go and hopefully trust that resource to be able to say, well, what's happening in the youth world at the moment?
Yeah, no, I've checked some of the blogs out. I think it's really good. You'd analysed a couple of books on there that I thought was really interesting. Yeah, no, that's good. And then, so what would you say, like, if you were giving advice to people, either setting up a clinic or looking at a new venture, what would your suggestions be?
Make sure that, so I guess some of the things are, make sure that you've got an absolute passion for the area you're in. I think you've absolutely got to, love what you're doing, because at times it's a hard graft. going into private practice gives you tons of flexibility. You can imagine with 2 international athletes, there were times I had to be on demand as mum, and private practice enabled me to be flexible. I could go to, work early morning, I could work at the evenings, I could work at the weekends. But equally, if you then take that if once I started working with youth athletes myself, there's only one time they can come, and that's 4 till 8 or the weekends. So when you start to think, I have loads of physios go, I'd love to do what you do, it looks really exciting. I'll turn around and say, well, are you prepared to give up evenings and weekends? If you want to work in that whole sporty world, you've got to be prepared to do loads of freebies or work for next to no money, because the graft you need to get the experience in the beginning, very few local clubs have any financial resources to pay people, but you've got to still be prepared. And what we're seeing now is that some of the younger people coming out of college think they're going to be able to walk into paid roles within sport. And what they forget is how many hours and hours I did grafting for free for Cheshire Cricket and for all sorts of different local hockey clubs and sports clubs and England volleyball. I did all that for free to begin with to get the experience. And then once I'd got those patient numbers under my belt, yes, I could command a paid role. But I think it's really important that you've got to have first a passion, because you're going to do a lot of time really, really grafting. And then obviously the success will come later. But I've never stopped loving what I do. And that's been a really important ingredient, because it's kept me with that thirst for learning, that thirst to do it really, really well. And that doesn't change now.
Yeah, no, definitely. No, it comes across, which is definitely, it's always good to see. Now, again, Andy and I, we talked a lot when I had a chat with him about some of his favourite books, but he talked about the E-Myth Revisited. I don't know if he's spoken with you about that one, about processes and so on. But are there any particular books that you've read that you find helpful from a business perspective, or in terms of, I don't know, motivation or anything like that?
I think one I seem to be using more and more at the moment, and when I read it, I'm not even sure I thought it was that good a book, but it's funny how some of the themes from it probably resonate with me a lot, is Will It Make the Boat Go Faster? And it's by Ben Hunt Davis. And it's a clever book in that we used it as a business model about maybe even 8 years ago, 6 years ago. So Ben was a British rower, and he was always in the 8, and you had your Steve Redgraves and all that lot, Matthew Pinsents, who were always in the singles or the pairs or the 4. And it would appear that the 8 is made up of people who've not quite made it. And so what happened was that this 8 got thrown together for every Olympic campaign, and they weren't necessarily a team. They may have been individuals who've now been thrown together. And this guy, Ben Hunt Davis, then said, well, we're going to have this theme where anybody can say anything. They'd had loads of failed campaigns, but anybody can say anything as long as it drives the boat to go faster. And so if it's political, if it's controversial, but it will make the boat go faster, we'll take it on board. But if it won't, then we just filter it as rubbish and we ignore it and don't get distracted. And we as at PhysioFit, there's plenty of other really good things around, shall we say, bull blank filters, about how to help athletes filter information that they hear, and self-confidence and self-talk. But fundamentally at PhysioFit, what we then did was said, right, well, what is our boat? And a friend of mine had told me to read this, who is a big senior person in some very big businesses, and they'd used it within some massive corporations. And so she said, focus on what your boat is. And I said, well, our boat is a 5-star place to work and a 5-star place, 5-star customer service. So what our team then were empowered with was they could bring up anything that would make it a 5-star place to work, and they could bring up anything that would drive forward 5-star customer service. But if they were just going to whinge about something that was completely not related to those two projects, then they had to park it for a different kind of input. And so our meetings became about how to drive 5-star customer service. Everybody was thinking about the length of the patient journey. And they were also then given that permission to work out how they could make it the place they really wanted to work. And so I think that book for me has helped me because I use it with athletes when we talk about them needing to stay on purpose. I use it with me a lot where I'm kind of going, oh, I could write a course on that or that. But no, actually, the course is giving physios and rehabbers that information that they need to get their first job in sport. So I had to keep coming back to what my boat is. And that's what Andy loves about me and that project, is that he knows that I'm like this random ideas woman that could go off all over the place, but he keeps bringing me back to what's my mission.
Yeah, no, I really like that. That's really interesting, isn't it? Because like it's not, you're not talking about outcomes even really, or business generation or anything like that. It's looking at the fundamentals of it, and that definitely resonates from my perspective. Yeah, I've not heard of that book, but that sounds really interesting.
It's good. And I think it gives you, there's some really good points on communication, which I think are really good for therapists, helping you to help patients as well identify what they do need to listen to and what they don't need to listen to. I think it's really good narrative about self-talk, and we've certainly been just done a blog recently about the impact of perfectionism, which I see in a lot of therapists, and how destructive and how related to injuries perfectionism is when it's linked to negative self-talk. So I think it's really important. It's a really good book for many different audiences.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to check it out. So
Good.
yeah, no, that's good. No, I really think it's really interesting to look at those things, and you can relate it to a number of different areas. But no, I really appreciate your time today. It's been really fascinating, not just that quote there, but no, it's been great. And again, we've known each other for a number of years, so it's really interesting for me to hear that, and I'm really pleased that everything's going very well with your new venture.
No, thank you very much for giving me the chance to. I love talking about how that journey to where I ended up, and that you can see I'm still really passionate about it. So thank you for giving me the chance.
No problem. No, appreciate your time, and I'll put some of the links in after this in the blog. Brilliant. Thanks, Angie. Good to see you. Bye-bye.
Bye.